Hello everybody, welcome back to the channel. So playing my Daemons of Khorne once again, 2500 points, this time up against an Ogre army. And a little bit apprehensive about this game, to be honest. Ogres are quick, movement 6, impact hits of course, so they'll be looking to get the charge just as much as I will, so I can get my +1 strength on the charge. They've got the impact hits. Should be a bit of cat and mouse there to see who can get the charge off. I won't have access to the killing blow special rule of course, which a lot of units in my army have, because they're all monstrous infantry, nor will I have access to the fear special rule, and neither will they of course. And also, because ogres have the Law of the Great Maw, and they have access to that signature spell, which can make their units stubborn. It's very low cast value as well, can't remember off the top of the head exactly, but it's quite easy for them to make their units stubborn. And with the style of play of my army, about having multiple small units, being able to flank and overlap my enemy and do some combination charges to try and break them. If they've got a big stubborn unit of ogres, I'm going to find that very difficult. My opponent Harry also hinted that he just bought some new quote shooty stuff. Not sure at this point what he meant by that, whether he's talking about iron blasters or the what do you call it, the guys with the hand cannons, or whether he's talking about the ogre war machines, but I was soon to find out. But the problem there is, of course, it could be another game where I've got to hide my bloodthirster, and the last time I did that was against a dwarf army, and he didn't come out from under the rock for most of the game and proved to be pretty ineffective. And of course my misfire cannons, aka skull cannons, weren't able to take out the enemy artillery to sort of release my bloodthirster from his hiding spot. Also got a soul grinder, which is not quite painted yet. It's annoying because could have done with a soul grinder for this game. I think something big and tough and fast as well, because I've got 2 units of flesh hounds. Flesh hounds aren't going to be that effective against ogres because there aren't really those sort of small size units that they can pick off and be annoying. And putting my flesh hound into a unit of ogres isn't going to do too much good. So I would have preferred to have the soul grinder, but I don't like putting down models which aren't fully painted, so you'll have to wait to the next game. The list you should be familiar with if you've seen any of my past videos. It's the same one I took to a tournament recently. So led by a bloodthirster, greater gift, lesser gift, coming in at 475 points, 42 bloodletters, full command of the Banner of Swiftness, filling out the core slot, 2 units of 4 blood crushers with full command. Why not? 2 units of flesh hounds, 6 flesh hounds, 2 units of 6 furies, 2 skull cannon. So the ogre army from left to right, then we've got a Noblar scrap launcher. First time seeing one of these on the tabletop. Let's see if that can do anything in this game. We've got 3 of the Mournfang cavalry. I don't think they've got the full command there. I think it's just a champion, and the champion had a brace of pistols. Of course, the ogre pistols are like handguns or whatever, so he's got a bit of shooting there. There's also 3 man-eaters at the back of the table there, which haven't been deployed at the point that I took this photo, but they will be scouting. And I think they've all got the Strider rule as well, so they're kind of sneaky ogre man-eaters. Moving on to the centre of the board there's a unit of 6 ogres with the Iron Fists. There's also a level 2 mage on Law of the Great Maw. In the middle you've got the unit of Iron Guts. I think there's about 8 of them there, with the level 2 Firebelly and the level 2 Bruiser General. Next up is the Lead Belchers. I do remember the name now. 4 of them, followed by this big beastie, is it the Thunder Tusk, I believe it's called, with 2 guys on top. One of them's got the harpoon, the other one's got the chain trap, and of course 1 iron blaster in the far corner. So just to whiz through my deployment quickly then, I've got the Bloodthirster on the far left flank, hiding behind the building there. I'm actually out of range of the Iron Blaster, but I wanted to stay out from those Lead Belchers as well, so just trying to keep the Bloodthirster safe on turn 1. Should I not get the first turn, I don't want to sort of keep him out in the open where he might get shot up. It is annoying, of course, not having my leadership bubble over my army, but of course that's just something I'm going to have to deal with at the moment. We are obviously demons, so it's not going to hopefully be a big problem for the first couple of turns of the game. Moving on to Flesh Hounds, Furies behind them, Blood Crushers, Cannons behind them, the big horde sort of in the middle but slightly to the right as well. I've actually positioned that horde facing that wood. There's a wood sort of in the middle of the table there, and I'm thinking those man-eaters that are scouting might end up in that wood, and should they do that, I don't want to have something like Blood Crushers, which has to take dangerous terrain, in front of that wood. I want just my big horde there ready to just charge into the wood if I need to. Followed by more Flesh Hounds, Furies behind them, and I've got my second unit of Blood Crushers way out on the flank there, ready to come round, actually sort of facing that that Iron Blaster in the top right hand corner. So Harry rolled up the Fulminating Flame Cage and the Flaming Sword of Ruin, decent. He also, for his other mage, he rolled up the Maw, which I'll come back to a bit later, and the Brain Gobbler, which of course my army is immune to because we're all immune to psychology, so he swapped that for the signature spell that gives you Stubborn. My Bloodthirster rolled up the +2 attacks on the Greater Gift, fantastic, and then can't remember what I rolled for the Lesser Gift, but I swapped that for the Sword of Swift Slaying. So the Bloodthirster is coming in at 8 attacks, at hitting on 3s, re-rolling at strength 7 on the charge. He's going to be pretty tasty, but he's still, of course, running around with a 5-up, 5-up, so I'm not going to sort of charge him out into a shooty army just yet, but hopefully once I get him into combat, he can do the business. So the Ogres got first turn, battle line scenario, and then the hordes of Ogres proceeded to kind of move up quite gingerly, with Harry sort of getting the tape measure out to measure the ranges of his guns and spells and so on, with nothing really marching full steam at me. In the magic phase, managed to get the flame cage off on the Blood Crushers, and didn't manage to get the Flaming Sword of Ruin on the Lead Belchers, which sort of very good result for me actually, because the last thing you want is those guys getting +1 to wound as well. And then proceeded to unload a volley of fire at the demons from across the tabletop. I found out that a few of his champions or characters had a brace of pistols. The man-eaters, which did deploy in the woods, also each had a brace of pistols. The Thunder Tusk, my first time playing one of those, has a kind of stone thrower thing, and the Harpoon has a range of 36 inches, it does D3 wounds. The Iron Blaster, of course. So there was and of course the Lead Belchers, which is the thing I'm scared of. So there's a big sort of hail of shots that came at me in the shooting phase as well, and although not entirely sort of focused, I was surprised that he didn't target the Iron Blaster at my Skull Cannon. Instead, sort of focused on trying to thin out the numbers of Bloodletters. Took a wound off one of the Blood Crushers as well, but I think maybe killed one Fury. But I think overall my army sort of came out relatively unsaved from Ogre turn 1. So Demons turn 1, and straight away the Bloodletter horde, looking at those man-eaters in the woods, I think they needed something like an 8 because they got the Banner of Swiftness, and I managed to roll it straight away on turn 1, so that horde just crashes into the woods, into those 3 man-eaters. Now those man-eaters are pretty tasty, but with a big horde and a lot of attacks, obviously I'm striking first before these slow ogres, so hopefully I can kill 1 or 2 of them and not take too many wounds back, and win that combat, and then decide then whether I want to go into that monster, or sort of stay put in the middle of the board there and sweep around with my other units. Straight off the bat as well, on the Winds of Magic, I roll a 4, giving my army -1 to the ward save. Not a good way to start, especially as I've got a combat on turn 1, but there we go. I've got my Blood Crushers coming around the right flank. I've got my Furies sort of coming up in support, ready to launch themselves in front of those ogres before they get too close, and sort of pushing up with my Flesh Hounds and Blood Crushers, but not too far. I don't want to get within charge range of those ogres just yet. My sort of rough plan in my head was to try and take out that Iron Blaster with the cannons. As you can see, I've pivoted both my cannons towards it, and come up round that right flank. If I can take out that Iron Blaster, those Blood Crushers can sweep round. Hopefully I can kill that monster before I have to start engaging with those two big units of Ogres in the middle. So that was the rough plan. The Bloodthirster has moved up, got a little bit lucky actually, because those, what are they called, Mournfang Cavalry, had come forward just a touch, and that Scrap Launcher had moved round to face the middle of the board. So there was a nice little spot for my Bloodthirster just to fly up and land out of the charge arc of that Mournfang Cavalry, facing the rest of the board there, and ready to sort of launch into the fray as things started to get closer to each other. It was also a nice spot because, of course, I'm out of the range of the Iron Blaster, and those Lead Belchers were unable to sort of pivot in a way that they can sort of accurately shoot at the Bloodthirster. So I think he was okay there for the time being. And then there's that other unit of Flesh Hounds that are sort of sweeping in towards the middle of the board, and hopefully I can use them, you know, when the action happens later in turns 2 and 3. My Skull Cannons fired, taking a big 4 wounds, I think it was, off the Iron Blaster. However, it has 6 in total, so wow, you know, big powerful war machine there. It's going to take another cannonball to do it. Of course, I misfire with the second Skull Cannon, which is unable to fire this turn or the next, and onto the close combat phase. So I'm then hit by a big surprise as I come into these Man-Eaters. Harry informs me that because I'm within 6 inch of this monster, this Thunder Tusk, my whole unit suffers the Always Strikes Last special rule, which actually made a huge difference to that combat, because it means these Man-Eaters are all able to unload with all their attacks into my horde before I even strike. And I can't remember how much it was. I lost a lot of bloodletters from all those Man-Eater attacks. I managed to kill 2 of them with all my attacks back, and I think win the combat. But it certainly made a big difference, and that last Man-Eater ended up sticking around and passing his leadership test. So I reformed the Bloodletter Horde to give me more ranks. Not entirely a bad result for the demons. However, my horde is kind of exposed now in the middle of the board. Not sure how Harry's going to react to that. I know if it were me, I'd probably try and pile in with everything in order to sort of take the opportunity to destroy that horde of Bloodletters, because it does hold a lot of points. But then again, my units of Blood Crushers are poised in position so that whatever does go into that Bloodletter unit is going to have to take those Blood Crushers in the following turn. So it'll be interesting to see how Harry reacts to that. But you know, reasonably successful turn 1. Ogre's turn 2. So Harry chooses not to take the bait and charge my Bloodletters, and instead repositions his unit slightly on my right flank, moves everything up in the centre there in order to give me another barrage. He also flips his Mournfang Cavalry around to face my Bloodthirster, which I wasn't expecting him to do actually. I was sort of expecting him to just sort of ignore the Bloodthirster there and think, well, I can't, not much I can do about that, and just sort of move his Mournfang up to support his Ogre blocks in the middle, but chose to face the Bloodthirster instead, and then proceeded to unload another barrage. Not before the magic phase, of course. And sorry, I made a mistake. Earlier, he didn't get the flame cage off earlier. It was this turn that he got the flame cage off on my Blood Crushers in the centre of the field, because on Demon's turn 1 I moved them and they were unhindered. It was Demon's turn 2 where I couldn't move them, so it was this magic phase where he got the flame cage off. I think the last magic phase he must have just tried to cast the Maw, which scattered off, and you know, didn't do any further actions to my army. But it was in this magic phase here where he got the flame cage off on Blood Crushers, and I think I managed to dispel the Flaming Sword of Ruin. And I was actually saving my dice for the Stubborn spell in case he tried to cast it on that last remaining Man-Eater locked into combat with my Bloodletters. But to be honest, I mean, even though I've reformed, I still had quite a good chance of killing that last man-eater. I think he was only on 1 or 2 wounds left, and you know, so that stubborn spell might not have had made a difference anyway. In fact, it wouldn't have made a difference because I did kill him in the close combat phase. Of course, the shooting phase came before that, and again, I managed to not really take much damage with my units. However, he was able to take out one of my skull cannons with the Iron Blaster, rolling a 4 on the d6 wounds. Ouch. So I only had that one skull cannon left, which can't fire in my turn. And his Mournfang Cavalry champion with the 2 pistols managed to take a wound off my Bloodthirster, of course, swiveling round with quick to fire in short range. You know, got a couple of hits and took a wound off the Bloodthirster. So that was a bit of a thorn in my side as well. And then the Man-Eater fought on bravely, but then gets dragged down by this big unit of Bloodletters, which then pivots towards the middle of the board, facing the flank of the Leadbelchers. And really, obviously, always nice to win a combat on your opponent's turn, isn't it? Facing the flank of those Leadbelchers, ready to come into the side of them, and it looks like I'll be able to win that combat quite handsomely, and hopefully set up a big crunch in the middle of the board on Demon's turn 2. So Demon's turn 2. So up at this point, we're sort of relatively even on points. Obviously, I've lost a Skull Cannon. He's lost 3 Man-Eaters, and I've still got most of my units relatively intact. But it's now I've got to really sort of execute a strategy to try and get some real points. So I declare a charge with the Blood Crushers on the right flank into that Iron Blaster. He flees, which I wasn't expecting at all, toward his back board edge there. The Blood Crushers then fail their charge because they fail their leadership test actually to redirect into the big beast there, and the Bloodletters charge into the flank of the Leadbelcher. I then proceed to move up my army in a way to set up a big charge on turn 3. So the Bloodthirster comes in just in front of those ruins there. The Mournfang Cavalry have their back to me now, so I'm not worried about them charging me in Ogre's turn 3. My Blood Crushers stay where they are because they've got the Flame Cage on them, but actually they're in a quite decent position there because the Ogre units have moved up, so they're already sort of within charge range. The Furies come over the top to chaff up both of those blocks of Ogres for Ogre turn 3, so hopefully I can get the Bloodthirster in quite comfortably on my turn. The Fleshhounds sort of reposition themselves a bit. I think these Fleshhounds at the bottom of the picture actually backed up a little bit, just in case those Ogres would just charge through those Furies for a big overrun. And the other set of Fleshhounds just coming up level with my Bloodletters there. The Skull Cannon, of course, can't fire this turn, so just manoeuvres in a place to also bring itself to charge if those Ogres come steamrolling through those Furies. And there's another set of Furies chaffing up that Thunder Tusk as well, so it doesn't go into the flank of my Bloodletters or Fleshhounds or whatever's there. So I finally get to take the counter of the -1 ward save off, and it passes by with some sort of glimpse of Zinch, which doesn't do anything of note. And with no shooting, we go straight onto the close combat, and those Bloodletters coming into the flank of those Leadbelchers, you know, with all the ranks and banner and everything, just blow straight through them, and he's on double ones, and those Leadbelchers do an epic flee through his whole line and through those ruins as well, and end up just by those Mournfang Cavalry on the left hand side of the board. He passes his panic test, but there's now a big gap there, and I've got a big decision. What do I do with these Bloodletters? Do I overrun into his main unit, into the flank of his main unit there of Iron Guts, or do I hold? In the end, I elected to stay put because, of course, it's Ogre's turn 3 next. I have the Bloodletters in the flank, so there's a good chance that, you know, I wouldn't take too much damage initially, although he could make way with his Bruiser. But it's just, you know, there's also the chance that it could go wrong, you know, and you know, there's Iron. He obviously shifts that Iron Gut from the back rank over, and you know, we fluff our attacks. Haven't got any killing blow, and those Iron Guts just munch through a bunch of those bloodletters. And the plan, that a rough plan I have in my head, of course, is that on turn 3 I can charge in with the Bloodthirster. And what I don't want is those Iron Guts having an easy way of building up their combat res by killing bloodletters, and then have the opportunity to pop my Bloodthirster on the combat res. So I kind of don't want my bloodletters in that combat at all. I just want to go in with the Crushers and the Bloodthirster, provided I have that opportunity in my turn. But it looks like I might have set that up to go as I planned it. So Ogre's turn 3. So the unit of Ogre Bulls go into the Furies in the middle and destroy them. The Thunder Tusk goes into the Furies standing in front of it, and destroy them. The Iron Blaster manages to rally. The unit of Iron Guts with the characters in it chooses to face the Bloodletters. Now this actually quite surprised me, because I was thinking, well, actually, aren't you more afraid of those Blood Crushers in front of you, or the Bloodthirster behind you? And, you know, wouldn't you rather receive one of those units in the front? But I guess at the time the Bloodletter unit was quite large, I guess Harry was thinking, well, you know, I want to get more attacks against that Bloodletter unit. But to be honest, looking back, Harry probably sees that a little bit of an error, because if I wanted that Bloodletter unit in combat, I would have done it last turn on my overrun. And so I kind of gave a bit of a hint there that I wasn't going to charge this on my turn anyway. But anyway, that's what happened. The Iron Guts decided to face off that Bloodletter unit. And Magic Phase, the first time I've actually seen the Ogre spell, the Maw, actually used well. Got a big direct hit on those Bloodletters, taking out a whole bunch of them, and was then followed by the rest of the shooting, which was a terrific round of shooting from the Ogres. This Noblar Scrap Launcher getting a direct hit on the Bloodletters as well, just killing a whole swathe of them. And it's funny, because I actually took a little picture of this dice roll where you can see all of the threes there, because he managed to get off the the flaming sword on the scrap launcher, which meant that it needed 3s to wound instead, and look at what a difference it made. So the time has come to pull the trigger, and I go in the flank of the Iron Guts with the Blood Crushers. I go into the rear of the Iron Guts with the Bloodthirster. Nobody wants that. and move up the Flesh Hounds. And I think I made a bit of an error here as well. See, I basically just decided to use the Flesh Hounds as chaff at this point, because I thought, well, I don't really need them in combat right now. They're not going to win a combat if they sort of charge in by themselves, but I don't want that unit of Ogre Bulls going into the flank of my Blood Crushers should they stick there for another round. I don't want that big Thunder Tusk going into that combat either, should it continue, and therefore I move up my Flesh Hounds to chaff both of those two units. In hindsight, I think I probably should have just charged, because the Flesh Hounds with their +1 strength on the charge could have a better chance of actually getting some more combat res, and having a more favourable dice roll on my instability test when I inevitably lose the combat. Just decided at the time just to chaff up those units. The Bloodletters just swivel round. Not entirely sure what I'm going to do with them yet, because they're not really powerful enough to take on any of the Ogre units at the moment. And those Blood Crushers who aren't in a position to charge, or however still at full strength, sort of move up on the right hand side of the board as well. So really kind of starting to turn the screw, as I say, focusing on this centre of the board to try and pick up some points from that Iron Gut unit with the characters in, and I'm ignoring those Mournfang Cavalry for now. So in the Winds of Magic, I get another terrible result, and I roll a 3, which means my Bloodthirster has to make a leadership test, losing a wound for every point he fails that leadership test for, and I roll an 11. Gosh, couldn't believe it. Another 2 wounds lost. He'd already taken a wound prior, if you remember, from that Mournfang Cavalry Champions pistols, and now he's lost another 2, which puts him down onto 2 wounds for this combat to kick off. However, he's hitting like an absolute ton of bricks with with 8 attacks, hitting on 3s, re-rolling, wounding on 2s. So he takes out a couple of ogres. The blood crushers coming into the flank there also take out some ogres. We just absolutely obliterate this unit, and they're on double ones, and we managed to cut them down, even though they actually roll, if I remember correctly, a big 11 on the flee distance, but I also rolled an 11 with the Bloodthirster, so cut them down. However, rather a unfortunate turn of events here, because he's fleeing away from my largest unit, the Blood Crushers, back towards his board edge there. It then puts my Bloodthirster, as you can see in the picture, rather out in the open, with that big Iron Blaster who's just rallied last turn, facing towards him. So I'm sort of thinking, uh-oh, good chance I'll lose my Bloodthirster next turn. But I've just picked up a load of victory points from that Iron Guts unit with the Fire Belly and the Bruiser General. So it's a big swing to the Demons on turn 3. So, Ogre's turn 4 then, the Bulls go into the Fleshhounds, the Thunder Tusk goes into the other unit of Fleshhounds, the Lead Belchers rally and sort of move up, although they don't have any target. Well, they rallied last turn, they're moving up there in a sort of 2x2 formation, as you can see, but don't really have any targets to shoot. Scrap Launcher pivots a little bit. I don't know why those Man-Eaters are still on the board there, they are in fact dead, but they just ignore those. Mournfang Cavalry moving up, again, nothing within charge range for them just yet. And this Iron Blaster pivots slightly to face the Bloodthirster. I then find out that these Iron Blasters can do a strength 10 Grape Shot, which is just absolutely terrifying. He goes for the Grape Shot, he rolls a 10 on the artillery dice. At this point I think, oh, the writing's on the wall now, and of course just blows the Bloodthirster straight off the board. So, well, that's how it goes sometimes. Bloodthirster managed to survive until now, into a relatively shooty army. I had thought that when that Iron Blaster fled, he would end up just fleeing off the board, because, without the General there, no BSB, I thought that was the end of that Iron Blaster, but of course he rallied, and then just unfortunate that my Bloodthirster ended up just right in front of it, and just gets a massive cannon to the face. Yeah, that's the way it goes. So another big swing back in favour of the Ogres. And then I proceed to throw away even more points, losing the units of Fleshhounds from those Ogre Bulls and that Thunder Tusk. So Ogres turn 4, big swing back in favour of the Ogres, losing my General, losing some Fleshhounds, and no idea where we are now in terms of victory points, but I expect the Ogres are probably ahead. So moving on then to Demons turn 4, which would be the last turn we get time to play. I've got my Blood Crushers in a decent position now to have a Thunder Tusk sandwich, and they charge the front, charge the rear, and kill it basically. We've got the Always Strikes Last, so I think he maybe took a wound off or fluffed the attacks or something, and then with all of those strength 6 juggernauts coming in, just crush this monster. So I managed to pick up some victory points at the end there. We totted up the scores, and it was something like 1,300 odd for the Demons and 1,200 odd for the Ogres, so pretty much a draw, or sort of very, very narrow win for the Demons. Really enjoyable game. Looking back, there was probably a few mistakes I made. The army list I spoke about initially in terms of having units of Fleshhounds which aren't particularly useful against Ogres, that are big and tough, and tend not to have sort of smaller chaff units that I need the Fleshhounds to get rid of. The Bloodletters sort of getting a bit out of position, just being a bit bloodthirsty in terms of going after those Man-Eaters on turn 1. However, they did retain their points, so I suppose I shouldn't really complain. And then I think I sort of played the strategy quite well in terms of managing to isolate and take out the Iron Gut unit with my most powerful units, and that's how Khorne works best. Really, you've got to use the Furies to trap up some units and just make sure you get that combo charge with the Blood Crushers, with the Bloodthirster, in order to just destroy something. And you've got to make sure, obviously, when you get that Bloodthirster in, that you've got someone to take the challenge. Your Bloodthirster doesn't get challenged out, which I did. I forgot to mention, but I did that with my Blood Crusher champion at the time. So if I played it again, I'm not sure I would have done anything that much different. Perhaps making sure that I get that Iron Blaster. But because of the terrain there, the Iron Blaster was able to flee through that gap in the rocks, and my Blood Crushers weren't able to pursue them without having to do a reform and go through there. So, not sure if I would have been able to get that Iron Blaster in time anyway. So what about this Ogre army then? So a bit of a fluffy list. We've got the Noblar Scrap Launcher, we've got Scouting Man-Eaters. So thoroughly enjoyable game to play. What could the Ogres have done differently? I don't know, I think if I was playing that army, with hindsight of course, I perhaps would have been a bit more eager to get across the board. I think he had a lot of shooting attacks which were quite effective in taking the odd wounds off here and there, but sometimes I think it's a bit of a trap when you've taken some shooting attacks, or you've taken some magic items, and you're thinking, well, I want to use those things that I've paid the points for. But then sometimes you just got to look at the army, the other side of the board, and think, you know what, I've got to change my strategy because it's not going to be the most effective one. Perhaps even concentrating the shooting on some of the chaff in the Demon's army, like the Furies or the Fleshhounds, just to get them out of the way, so you can just move your blocks of Ogres up the board. And because a lot of my units, the Demons, didn't really have anything that's that tough with a particularly good armor save, so probably could have charged through them with a lot of the bigger Ogre units. Magic, I guess Harry might have been a bit disappointed with that he didn't manage to get any of those good hex spells. Sometimes that's just the way the dice roll, isn't it? So he only had the Maw and the Stubborn spell, where it's really those strength and toughness buffs and the regen buffs, which is what I'm most worried about as a Demons player without any ability to dispel, without a dispel scroll or magic levels to help me dispel, is getting those hexes and augments out that can help swing the combat to your way, which is what I think the Demons fear the most. What else? The Bloodthirster was a big factor, of course, with that big, long 20-inch swoop, being able to get behind your lines. I think maybe it could have been good to perhaps even to run away from the Bloodthirster on turn one. If the Ogre's got turn one, just sort of see where the Bloodthirster is and think, you know what, I'm just going to get out of its way. Perhaps turn those Morfang cavalry, move them more towards the middle of the board, so there's no space for that Bloodthirster to land in a very convenient position. Because if you've got a sort of shooty army, you just need to stay together really and make sure that if someone does come at you, they're coming at all of you and having to face all your shooting all at once. But yeah, really enjoyable game to play. I hope you guys enjoyed watching the battle report. Leave a comment. Speak to you all soon. Goodbye.